Every night, just after 2 a.m., the same call came in. A woman's trembling voice whispering the same words. "Please, you have to help him. He's bleeding again." But the name she gave the man she begged them to save had died 2 years ago. His case was closed. His grave was real. The officers thought it was a prank until one night, the call didn't come from her phone. It came from his... It started with a sound, the thin, trembling echo of a phone ringing through an empty police station at 2:30 a.m. The kind of hour when the city is asleep and the silence feels alive. Officer Rehan was on night duty, staring at the clock, half listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights when the call came in. He picked it up without much thought, expecting another drunk report or a wrong number. But the voice on the other end wasn't drunk. It was terrified. "There's someone in my house," she whispered. "Please, you have to send someone quickly." Rehan straightened in his chair, instinct snapping awake. He took down the address for 1 Malik Crescent and promised help was on the way. Before he could ask more, the line went dead. He radioed it in, dispatched a car, and thought little more of it. Calls like that came in sometimes, shadows mistaken for intruders, lonely hearts hearing echoes in their halls. But then, the next night, it happened again. Same time, same woman, same trembling voice. "There's someone in my house." Rehan's pen froze mid-air. He asked her name this time. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to feel wrong. Then, softly, she said, "My name is Sarah." When the patrol reached the house, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no disturbance, no footprints, no woman waiting by the door. The neighbors said the place had been empty for years. Rehan listened to the static on the radio that night, a creeping unease threading through his thoughts. The calls kept coming. Every night, always at 2:13. Always the same plea. And though he didn't want to believe it, each time, the voice sounded fainter. By the 5th night, Officer Rehan had stopped pretending it was nothing. He sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the phone, waiting for it to ring. He'd memorized the address by now. 41 Maple Crescent. Even though he knew what the patrol would find. Nothing but dust, boarded windows, and the hollow silence of an abandoned house. When the clock struck 2:13 a.m., the phone rang. Sharp, inevitable, like the echo of something that refused to die. He answered before the second ring. "Sarah?" A soft inhale. A faint tremor. "He's here again," she whispered. "He keeps coming closer." Rehan felt his throat tighten. "Sarah, I need you to tell me what you see." For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice, low, distant, murmured something he couldn't make out. Not Sarah's voice. Deeper. Male. The line went dead. Rehan grabbed his coat and keys before the dispatcher could stop him. Maple Crescent was less than 10 minutes away, but the streets felt longer that night, the mist thick enough to blur the lamps into ghostly halos. He parked under the same dead streetlight and stepped out. The house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, dark, skeletal, half swallowed by ivy. The front door creaked open under his touch. Inside, the air was stale. Furniture draped in sheets. Footprints in the dust, his own, from the last time. The radio on his belt crackled faintly as he called it in, but the signal was weak. He moved deeper into the hallway, the floor groaning beneath each step. Then he saw it. The phone, a rotary. 1. Sitting on a small wooden table in the corner of the living room. The cord was cut clean, severed years ago. And yet, the dial tone was still humming. Rehan stared at the phone, every instinct in his body screaming to step back, but he didn't. The steady hum in the receiver wasn't mechanical. It had a pulse to it, a faint tremor that almost felt alive. He reached out, lifted it slowly, and pressed it to his ear. Nothing. Then, A whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." The voice was soft, almost tender, but soaked in something cold. Something that crawled beneath his skin. He froze, listening. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard breathing on the other end, slow and wet, like someone standing right behind him. He turned sharply. No one, just the empty house, breathing through the cracks in the walls. "Who is this?" he said. His voice barely sounded like his own. The line clicked, and then, faintly, he heard Sarah again. "Officer." "Rehan, I told you he doesn't want me to talk." Rehan's chest tightened. "Sarah, where are you?" Her answer came like a sigh. "You already know." The line went dead again. He dropped the receiver. It spun slightly before falling silent. He stood there for a long while, listening to the creaks and groans of the house, until his flashlight caught something on the wall. A picture frame. Dusty. Faded. He wiped the glass with his sleeve. The photo was old, maybe 20 years. A family portrait. A man, a woman, and a little girl with bright eyes and long black hair. The woman looked exactly like Sarah. Rehan stepped back, heart hammering. The date at the bottom read 1998. He remembered then, years ago, during his early days on the force, there'd been a fire on Maple Crescent. A man had died in it. His wife and daughter were never found. The phone behind him rang once more. This time, it didn't sound like a call. It sounded like a warning. By morning, Rehan had convinced himself he imagined it all. The voice, the whisper, the photo that looked too familiar to be real. But as daylight crept across the station blinds, the unease stayed. It wasn't just a bad night. It was something that followed him home. He sat at his desk, staring at the case file the department had closed 2 decades ago. The Malik residence fire, 1998. Cause, electrical fault. Casualties, 1 confirmed dead. Rehan Malik, father, to Miss and Sarah Malik, age 9, and Amina Malik, wife. Case unresolved. Tesami name, the same address. He turned the file pages slowly. The paper yellowed and brittle. Someone had underlined a sentence and read, "No surviving family members located." But if that were true, then who had been calling him every night? He drove back to Maple Crescent that afternoon, sunlight filtering through bare branches. The house looked different in daylight. Smaller, almost fragile, but the front door still hung open slightly, as if waiting for him. Inside, dust hung like fog. His flashlight beam slid over the same walls, the same cracked photo frame. But something else caught his attention now, a trail of footprints leading down the hallway. Smaller ones, barefoot. They ended at a door he hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a shelf. He pushed it open carefully. The hinges groaned like something exhaling after years of silence. It was a child's room. The wallpaper had peeled, but drawings still clung to the wall's crooked houses. Stick figures, and sons with smiling faces. A small wooden bed sat in the corner, the blanket folded neatly as if waiting for someone to return. On the bedside table lay a toy, a faded rabbit with one ear missing. He picked it up and turned it over. Stitched along the hem, in small letters, was a name. Sarah. Rehan exhaled slowly. The air felt colder now, and beneath the floorboards, faintly, came the sound of something tapping. Once, then twice, like tiny footsteps, trying to be heard. Rehan crouched, pressing his ear to the wooden floorboards. The sound was faint but deliberate, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles brushing against hollow wood. He knocked back once, softly. The tapping stopped. Then, 3 seconds later, it replied. 3 knocks. Rehan's pulse quickened. He ran his hand along the floor, searching for loose boards. Near the foot of the bed, one plank shifted slightly beneath his weight. He wedged his fingers in and lifted it. A burst of cold air escaped. Air that smelled of ash and something else. Perfume, maybe. Beneath the board was a small compartment, and inside it lay a box, wrapped in faded cloth. He lifted it gently onto the bed and unwrapped it. Inside were fragments of another time, a silver locket, a half-burnt photograph, and a folded piece of paper covered in childish handwriting. Read, allude, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dear Daddy, if you come back, Mummy says we'll hide from the bad man again. I'll keep the light on so you can find us. Love, Sarah." The paper trembled slightly in his hand. The words, "bad man," burned into his mind like an accusation. He turned the photograph over. It showed the same family from before. But in this one, Sarah's father wasn't smiling. His eyes were hard, distant, and his arm, instead of resting gently on his daughter's shoulder, seemed to grip her tightly. A floorboard creaked behind him. Rehan froze. His reflection in the dusty mirror looked pale and distant, as if he were staring at someone else entirely. The small handprint below the words seemed fresh, clearer than the rest of the glass, as though a real child had pressed her fingers there moments ago. He whispered to himself, "Sarah." The name hung in the air like a memory too heavy to let go. He stepped closer, brushing his hand across the message. The dust smeared, but the outline of the words lingered faintly beneath, as if they were written inside the mirror, not on it. A gust of wind swept through the hall, slamming the door shut behind him. His flashlight flickered, its beam slicing through the dimness in brief, trembling flashes. For a split second, he saw movement in the reflection, a silhouette standing behind him. Small, still, watching. He turned sharply. Nothing. The light steadied again. The room was empty. Only the old toys and peeling wallpaper remained, though now even they seemed to breathe with the house alive. Unsettled, he forced himself to think logically, to act like a detective, not a frightened man chasing ghosts. He took photos of the mirror, the handprint, and the note, then stepped back into the hall. Downstairs, he found the fuse box. The wires were ancient, brittle, yet someone had clearly tried to reconnect them recently. A single wire snaked toward the wall phone. Rehan traced it with his hand, following it behind the wallpaper. There, hidden beneath layers of paint, he found something carved directly into the plaster, a circle with a cross through it. A mark? And next to it, faint but unmistakable, another name. Amina. Sarah's mother. The air shifted, colder now, like the house itself exhaled that name. Then the phone in the living room began to ring again. Once, twice, 3 times. Rehan didn't move. He just stared toward the sound, heart pounding, as a child's voice echoed faintly through the walls. Not from the phone this time, but from somewhere deeper inside the house. "You're too late, officer." Rehan didn't sleep that night. The sound of that voice, calm, almost playful, replayed in his head like a haunting lullaby. He sat in his car across from the house, engine off, watching its dark windows through the fogged windshield. The street was silent, but the house seemed to breathe, faint light flickering behind the curtains, even though the electricity had long been cut. At sunrise, he went to City Records. If Sarah Malik and her mother had vanished in 1998, there had to be something, a trace, a report, a neighbor's statement. The clerk at the archive was an older man, eyes half closed from routine. "Malik residence, Maple Crescent," Rehan said. "House fire. I need full documentation. Autopsy, property records, anything." The clerk frowned, flipping through a digital registry. "That file was sealed. Officer. Access restricted after 99. "By who?" The man hesitated. "Internal Affairs said there were irregularities. The officer who handled the case never filed the final report." Rehan's pulse quickened. Who was the officer? The man looked at him curiously, then turned the screen so Rehan could see. The name burned across the monitor. Inspector Arif Malik. Rehan stared. That's the father. He was the one who, the clerk interrupted softly. And the fire. Turns out it started in his office. Upstairs, they said he'd been under review for misconduct before it happened. Rehan stepped back, his mind racing. The husband was the investigating officer. The suspect, the victim. He drove straight back to Maple Crescent. The morning sun couldn't disguise the house's unease, the way its windows seemed to tilt downward, as if watching him. He walked inside, the air heavy with that same burnt scent that had never truly faded. Upstairs, he found a charred desk against the wall. Half the drawers were melted shut. In one, he found what looked like an evidence envelope, scorched but intact. Inside was a cassette tape, the label smeared but still readable. It said one word, confession. The cassette felt oddly warm in Rehan's hand, as if it had absorbed the fire that tried to destroy it. He dusted it off and slipped it into his old tape recorder, one he kept in his trunk for interviews. The reels began to spin with a faint hiss. The sound of decades whispering back to life. A man's voice emerged, steady at first, controlled. This is Inspector Arif Malik, March 3rd, 1998. Case log. Personal. Not for department files. Rehan leaned in. The voice carried fatigue, the kind that comes from more than sleepless nights. It was the sound of someone unraveling. My wife, Amina, says I've changed. Maybe I have. This case, it's not just a case anymore. The evidence doesn't line up. Every time I close it, something opens again. There was a pause, followed by shaky breathing. Then, softo last night, Sarah woke up screaming, said there was someone in her room. A man with no face. Rehan's grip tightened on the recorder. The static between words almost sounded like breathing. I checked the house. Nothing. But then, she looked at me and said, "He's inside you now, Daddy." The tape crackled violently, and a thud echoed. Maybe the recorder hitting the floor, maybe something worse. Then a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It's too late, Arif. The voice wasn't his. Rehan stopped the tape. He sat there in silence, the air pressing against him. The unease he'd felt since the first call suddenly made sense. This house had never been haunted by strangers. It was haunted by its own history. He rewound the tape slightly, focusing on the background noise. Underneath Arif's voice, beneath the crackling, there was a faint ringing sound, rhythmic, distant. The same sound the old rotary phone made every night at 2:13 a.m. Rehan's blood ran cold. He looked toward the living room. The phone was silent now. Still, but the recorder in his hand suddenly began to rewind on its own, and from the speaker, a child's voice whispered, "You shouldn't have played it, officer." The tape stopped mid-rewind. The room went still. Even the dust in the air seemed suspended, waiting. Rain's heartbeat echoed louder than the silence itself. He lowered the recorder slowly, his hand trembling. Then the power flickered. Once, twice, and the phone rang. Not its usual sharp tone. This time, it was slower, deeper, like something old struggling to be heard. He turned toward it, drawn more by instinct than reason. The cord still hung severe, yet, as he stepped closer, the ringing grew louder. Not in his ears, but inside his head. He picked up the receiver. Static, then breathing, then Rehan, his own name, spoken like a sigh. "You've seen what he did." The voice was faint, almost tender. "It was Sarah. You can end it, can't you?" Rehan swallowed hard. "End what? Sarah? What happened here?" A pause. Then a whisper so soft it sounded like a secret. "He set the fire. But it didn't kill him. It kept him here." Rehan's grip tightened. "You mean your father? He never stopped watching us." The line dissolved into static, but beneath it, faintly, he could hear crying. A woman's voice. Amina. He turned, scanning the room. The shadows shifted. The smell of smoke returning. Stronger now, filling the air with heat that shouldn't exist. The wallpaper began to curl, blackening at the edges. The floorboards crackled under his boots. The house was remembering. He stumbled back toward the stairs, the sound of the fire growing louder, until it was no longer sound, but memory bleeding into reality. He saw shapes moving in the smoke, a man shouting, a woman shielding her child, flames swallowing the walls, and through it all, the same voice repeated from nowhere and everywhere. Arif's voice, calm and chilling. "You can't save them, officer. You never could." Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The smoke, the fire, the voices. Only the faint echo of the phone remained. Rehan stood alone in the cold, burnt silence, but the receiver in his hand was still warm. By the time dawn bled across the sky, Rehan was sitting on the front steps of the house exhausted, his face streaked with soot, his thoughts heavier than the night behind him. The house stood eerily quiet now, as if it had told him everything it wanted to say and was waiting for him to understand. He replayed the tape in his mind. Arif's confession, Sarah's whispers, the fire that refused to stay buried. None of it added up, unless the story everyone believed had been a lie from the start. At the precinct, Rehan pulled every old file connected to Inspector Rehan Malik's career. A pattern emerged. Domestic calls, multiple complaints of violence, all quietly withdrawn by Amina Malik. Before the fire, there were photos, too. Bruises disguised as accidents, statements, unsigned. A picture began to form, and it made his stomach twist. Arif hadn't been a man haunted by his case. He was the case. But there was one thing missing. The official cause of his death. The autopsy report had been redacted, pages torn away. Only one note remained in the margin, scribbled hastily. Body partially recovered, lower jaw missing. Rehan sat back in his chair, staring at that single sentence. He didn't know why, but it made him think of the phone again. The voice that spoke through it, deep and distorted. He drove back to Maple Crescent that night, one last time. The house loomed darker than ever, its silhouette fractured against the dim moonlight. Inside, the smell of ash was gone. The silence felt thicker, like something had been waiting. He made his way to the living room, to the phone that had started it all. It was gone. In its place lay the burnt tape recorder, melted around the reels. The tape itself was missing. And written on the wall, faint but visible under the flickering light of his torch, was a message drawn in soot. "You took his voice." Rehan's flashlight trembled in his hand. The soot-written message stared back at him, its edges still fresh, as if someone had just finished writing it. "You took his voice." The air inside the house felt charged, not like a haunting, but like a memory fighting to stay alive. Rehan could hear faint clicks somewhere beneath the floorboards, like metal shifting. He followed the sound into the hallway, past the mirror with the faded handprint, until he reached the door to the basement, one he hadn't noticed before. It was locked from the outside. He broke the latch and stepped into the dark. The stairs groaned under his weight, each creak echoing like a warning. The deeper he went, the stronger the scent of smoke became, and something else. Burnt oil. Metal. At the bottom, his light caught something glinting in the shadows. A row of old tape recorders, their reels still turning slowly, though none were plugged in. Each one emitted faint sounds, fragments of voices overlapping in broken loops. "He's here again. You promised you'd stop." "Daddy, don't." Rehan's breath caught. The voices of Sarah, and Arif. Dozens of them, tangled in a chaos of whispers. He stepped closer. One recorder sat apart from the rest, newer, untouched by fire. Its label read, "Evidence B, final entry." He pressed play. At first, just silence. Then, "If you're hearing this," the voice said unmistakably Arif's, "then the house has already chosen you." Rehan froze. "I couldn't silence them. I tried. The fire didn't kill them. It only burned me away. A deep crackle interrupted him, followed by a sound like a low growl beneath human words. "You'll try to save them, officer. Just like I did, and you'll fail too." The recorder clicked off. Rehan stood in the flickering light, the air closing in around him. The other tapes began to spin faster on their own, voices rising, merging until one cut through all the others. A child's whisper, clear and close. "He's not gone. He's waiting behind you." Rehan turned slowly, every instinct in his body screaming not to. His flashlight beam trembled over the cracked walls, the dusty shelves, the empty air. Nothing moved, and yet something was there. The faint smell of smoke thickened into something heavier. Breath. Warm. Almost human. He could feel it brush the back of his neck. He swung around. The beam caught a figure only for a split second. A man burnt from the chest up, eyes hollow, jaw moving soundlessly, then gone. Rehan stumbled backward, hitting the workbench. One of the tape recorders fell and cracked open reels, spilling out like veins. The voices stopped. Silence dropped, sudden and absolute. In that stillness, a thought sank into him like ice. The message on the wall. He took his voice. He replayed it in his head. Arif's last case, a local arsonist who was never caught. The man he arrested had died in custody after claiming Arif framed him. Rehan's pulse raced. Could this house be the same one that burned down because of that case? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Arif's final case file. The one he'd found sealed at the station. The photo paper had warped from humidity, but the name was still visible. Naviorov. Below it, house fire. 2 casualties, 1 child missing. The walls seemed to tighten around him. He shone his light on the mirror across the basement, the one still somehow intact. His reflection looked back. Butt bendit. Another faint outline began to appear. Smaller, childlike. The mirror fogged up as if someone were breathing on the other side. Then a line appeared in the mist, drawn by an invisible finger. "You can't save him either." The glass cracked. Rehan stumbled back, but before he could move farther, the tape recorders all clicked on again, together screaming through the static one word over and over. "Liar, liar, liar." And from somewhere beyond the darkness, a door creaked open upstairs. Someone was in the house. The sun was rising when Detective Rehan Mirza finally left the house. The fog had thinned into a pale gray mist, clinging to the hedges like memory refusing to fade. Inside, the phone on the wall still hung loose, the same one she had used to make those midnight calls. It was quiet now, just the gentle hum of morning light brushing against walls that had heard too much. He stood on the porch and looked at the empty street. 4 weeks, her voice had filled his nights, trembling, frightened, begging them to save a man who wasn't alive. The sound had clung to him long after the calls ended. Now, there would be no more calls. No trembling voice. No second chances. A forensic team carried out the last box of evidence. Inside it, an old photograph, the woman smiling beside the man she'd loved, years before everything fell apart. Rehan paused when he saw it. They looked happy, peaceful, like time hadn't yet decided to turn cruel. He wondered if she had called every night not because she was lost in delusion, but because love, in its own haunted way, refuses to accept finality. Maybe she wasn't calling the police. Maybe she was calling him. He thought about her words from the recording they'd recovered her. Last one. He's back. I see him in the garden. Please, don't let him in. There had been no one in the garden, only a reflection on the window, hers, blurred by tears. As Rehan walked away, he didn't feel victory, just a quiet ache that sat heavy in his chest. Sometimes, the truth doesn't set you free. It only shows you how deep a heart can break before it stops trying. At the station, he opened the case file one last time, then he closed it. Slowly, deliberately. The woman's name written on the cover seemed to fade under his touch, as if letting go was the final act of kindness he could offer. He stared out the window as the city woke up, the sound of traffic rising like static over a world that had already forgotten, but he hadn't. Some cases, he whispered to himself, don't end when they're solved. They end when you stop hearing the voice. The line lingered in the air like the last echo of a dream. Then he turned off the light.